on this Monday morning. It's time to check in with one of our staff writers, Joanna Marsh, who has been covering the pulse of the railroads for the last several weeks when we're talking about labor negotiations. Now, President Biden is stepping in with some oversight from the federal level. Joanna, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Kaylee. Appreciate it.
So let's kind of break it down. We knew that this could be a possibility coming for this federal oversight into rail negotiations, but we didn't know when it was going to happen or even if it was going to happen at all. Give us a little bit of oversight. What's going on with the situation now? What has President Biden decided to do?
Sure. So the Railway Labor Act is a federal law that the railroads and the unions must comply by as they negotiate contracts. And so since January of 2020, the unions have been working without a contract because the negotiation process began, and talks have actually continued on since that time. And earlier this spring, the unions sought the National Mediation Board, which is a federal board independent of the railroads and the unions, to oversee the negotiations because the unions felt it wasn't going anywhere. And so the NMB, the National Mediations Board, looked into the negotiations. They tried to negotiate between the railroads and the unions over this, and that didn't work out as well. And so there is still difficulties in trying to meet some key issues, and so they released the negotiations. And so per the law, the next step is for the president, which is Joe Biden, of course, to establish a presidential emergency board, and that's a 3-member board. It's an impartial board that will take up the issue and spend the next 30 days looking at it, potentially holding hearings and talking to people and trying to come up with some recommendations that the unions and the railroads can use to help with the negotiations. So that should be coming up in the next several weeks. They'll produce a report, and that report will have the recommendations.
Joanna, as we continue to move forward with this group being put together, what does that look like? Is that going to be another 30-day process potentially, or is this something that can really kind of be done right away, then get straight on the ground running and get straight to tackling the situation?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 30 days. I'm kind of curious myself because I actually haven't covered a rail strike, situation like this in the time that I've covered the railroads. And actually, I think the last strike that the United States saw was in the 1990s, in the early 1990s. So it's been a while because the law kind of prohibits when unions can strike. But let me see. So the report, during that time, they'll be gathering information, they'll be holding hearings and talking to people, and they'll release recommendations. And it's possible if those recommendations, if there needs to be more tweaking, that they could actually have another 30-day information gathering period with some more recommendations following that. So just because we have this 30-day period right now, it's not to say that there could be another one in the future. So it's part of the ongoing process toward these negotiations.
And this process is something that we're going to be watching pretty closely. But I want to talk a little bit about this federal oversight and the presidential board, because it seems like with the rail specifically, this is kind of a huge step, right, to make it the president's problem instead of having another agency over the top of it. Is this something that's kind of unusual for a president to step in at this level when it comes to the other sectors of supply chain? And could we expect now to see more presidential oversight of those other sectors, or is it just that it's unique to the railroads to have that presidential oversight?
Well, it is in the regulations for this to happen if the negotiation, fail to accomplish a contract. So this is in the law for it's part of the procedure. So it's not. So people, there is some expectation that this we would get to this step if negotiations hadn't, we're going through. But I think some people have argued that pushing this to the presidential level might benefit the unions because obviously you have a Democratic president who is supposed to be supportive of the unions, and you have these rail congestion issues and the supply chain issues. So it probably helps the unions to have that extra that extra support, even though the board is impartial, supposed to be impartial, and sort of offer hopefully some fresh ideas. But it's an interesting time to be at this negotiation pass, especially when you have all this rail congestion and all the supply chain issues still going on.
And so we know that some of the key issues about this have to do with staffing levels and train crew levels, technology implementation. But what are kind of some of those key points that the unions and the railroads are hoping to agree on, and how close are they to meeting in that agreement?
Sure. So the railroads and the unions have kind of given some general ideas about like what they're working on. They haven't really given a lot of details about actually what specific issues are going on in negotiations. So healthcare has been one issue. I think some of the benefits have been another issue as well. And so they haven't given a lot of detail about what exactly the big sticking points are. But the railroads are saying, we offer really competitive benefits, and the industry has historically, supplied really good benefits to workers, especially if they don't have a college degree. Here's something you can make a lot of good money being on the rail. And obviously, as you mentioned, the technology piece is looming in the background. So I think the port workers kind of face a similar situation. So, with technology, how does that affect the role of the railroad employee? And it's not just train, how many people will be driving a train, if it's, one person or two people, but it's also, what are the responsibilities of the inspectors who maintain the track and who make sure everything's okay. Like, what are the responsibilities of the repair people who conduct repairs when you have this technology that can do things that humans can't do. So it's not just the train crew size, but it's also what are the roles and responsibilities of the workers, and how does technology change the scope and how much territory they have to cover. So it's a pretty big issue. Although I don't know if that'll all be in the contract, but it's definitely something that's on people's minds. So.
And Joanna, a bit of a two-part question here. Are there any wild or outside variables that could happen, or factors that aren't really kind of being taken into account? And what's the history, if you know, of how airtight some of these strikes are? Do these things usually kind of hold up, or do these things kind of crumble from time to time when you're looking at the rail industry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, from what I heard from various people, there was a sense that the board that Biden would elect a board, and so and so that wasn't unexpected. But I think if strike were to happen, even if it's just a short-lived one, that would create, tremendous ripple effects throughout the North American supply chain, because you have to, in preparation for a strike, you have to wind down operations, or you have to change the way, obviously, change the way you work things. And so even if it's just for a day or so, that can, there's a whole process involved in responding to a strike. I mean, you see kind of what happens in Canada. Canadian National had a strike in late 2019, and it was 10 days long, but it took a couple of weeks for the supply chain to recover. And so, I'm sorry, Owen, what was your other question? I missed that. If you could repeat the first one again?
I think you hit them both. The first one being if there were any kind of wildcard variables, and of course the significance of the strike potentially. But yeah, thank you, Joanna, so much for joining us this morning. This has been informative, and we'll be sure to keep in touch with you as the situation continues to develop.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Anthony. It's good talking to you both.
All right, you can follow Joanna up on freightwaves.com. She's consistently updating about the situation on the rails. Right now, we're going to take a look at what is trending on trucking social media today with our first look at the Social Roundabout.